stand atop Ludgate Hill today, and the Portland stone dome of Christopher Wren's masterpiece fills the London skyline like a white crown. Each year, 1 million visitors climb its steps, photograph its galleries, and stand beneath the Whispering Gallery where every word curves along 300 feet of circular stone. But rewind 360 years, and you would have found a Gothic mountain 593 feet long, its spire rising 493 feet into the smoke-stained air, taller than any building in medieval Europe save the cathedrals of Lincoln and Beauvais. Market stalls, beggars, prostitutes, horses. A nave where merchants closed deals and pickpockets worked the crowds, where the homeless slept beneath tombs and the mad preached from the font. Using cutting-edge AI reconstruction, we are about to walk you through every century of old St. Paul's Cathedral story, from the Roman temple that once crowned this hill to the September morning in 1666 when the lead roof melted and ran molten down Ludgate Hill like a river of fire. Ludgate Hill is the highest of London's 2 natural mounds, rising 100 feet above the Thames. When the Romans built Londinium in the 1st century, they crowned this summit with a temple. Archaeology has never confirmed which god, though theories range from Diana to Jupiter. By the time Roman Britain collapsed in 410, the temple was already a ruin. Saxon London grew slowly around the old Roman walls. In 604, the Kentish king Ethelbert controlled the city, newly converted to Christianity by Augustine of Canterbury. Augustine's disciple Mellitus became the first bishop of London, and Ethelbert ordered a cathedral built on Ludgate Hill where the pagan temple had stood. This first St. Paul's was a wooden church, modest and dark, heated by braziers and lit by candles. It burned in 675. The second cathedral, built by Bishop Eorsenwald around 675, was stone, Kentish ragstone hauled up from the Thames wharves, laid without mortar in the old Roman fashion. Eorsenwald's cathedral survived Viking raids in the 9th century, though the raiders stripped its bronze and silver. When the Danes sacked London in 962, they torched the cathedral again. Bishop Dunstan rebuilt it within 2 years, adding a wooden roof and a bell tower. This third iteration stood for exactly 100 years. On the night of January 10, 1067, fire consumed Dunstan's cathedral and much of the city around it. William the Conqueror had been king for 3 months. London was restless, Saxon resentment simmering beneath Norman occupation. The timing felt like divine judgment to both sides. William appointed Maurice as Bishop of London in 1086. Maurice was Norman, ambitious, and determined to build a cathedral that would dwarf every church in England. He began construction in 1087 on the charred foundations of the Saxon ruin. The plan was audacious, a cruciform cathedral 590 feet long, with a nave 130 feet wide and vaulted ceilings rising 90 feet above the floor. Norman Romanesque style, round arches, massive columns, walls 8 feet thick at the base. Stone came from quarries in Kent and Normandy, floated up the Thames on barges. Maurice died in 1087, barely a year into construction. His successor Gundulf of Rochester continued the work. Progress was agonizingly slow. The eastern end took 30 years. The transepts another 20. By 1140, the choir was complete, and services resumed in the half-finished building while construction continued around the congregation. The nave was finished in 1180 under Bishop Richard de Belmay. The western facade followed in 1189. But the cathedral remained unfinished. No towers. No spire. Just a wooden roof covered in lead, heavy and functional. Then in 1196, fire struck again. The roof collapsed. The eastern chapels were gutted. Stone columns cracked from the heat. King Richard I was in the Holy Land, and England was bleeding money to fund his crusades. Repairs dragged on for 20 years. In 1221, Bishop William de St. Mireglise finally completed the restoration and began the eastern extension, adding a new Lady Chapel and retro choir in the early English Gothic style. Round Norman arches gave way to pointed Gothic ones. The contrast was visible inside the building: Romanesque solidity in the nave, Gothic verticality in the choir. The new work was consecrated in 1240 during the reign of Henry III, who attended the ceremony with his court. Old St. Paul's was now the longest cathedral in England. In 1251, lightning struck the cathedral's wooden tower. The roof burned. The bells melted. The fire spread to surrounding houses, and 13 people died. Bishop Fulk Bassett ordered an immediate rebuild, this time in stone. Over the next 20 years, masons raised a crossing tower 150 feet high, then began the spire, an octagonal wooden frame sheathed in lead, tapering to a gilded cross. By 1285, the spire reached 493 feet, making Old St. Paul's the tallest building in the world. You could see it from Windsor, from the North Downs, from ships 10 miles out on the Thames estuary. The cathedral dominated medieval London the way the Eiffel Tower dominates Paris. Inside, the building was a riot of color. Every surface was painted, red and gold geometric patterns on the columns, blue star-vaulted ceilings, carved bosses picked out in scarlet and green. Stained glass windows filtered the light into jeweled shafts. Tombs lined the walls: bishops, knights, merchants who had paid for the privilege. The shrine of St. Erkenwald, the 7th century bishop whose bones were said to cure blindness, stood behind the high altar, encased in silver and studded with gems donated by pilgrims. Outside, the cathedral precinct sprawled across 10 acres. St. Paul's Cross stood in the churchyard, an outdoor pulpit under a wooden canopy where bishops and scholars preached to crowds that could number in the thousands. Sermons at Paul's Cross were political events. Kings announced wars there. Heretics were denounced. In 1381, the teenage Richard II addressed the rebels of the Peasants' Revolt from the cross, promising reforms he would later revoke. The cathedral itself was never just a place of worship. The nave, called Paul's Walk, became London's premier indoor promenade. Merchants met clients there. Lawyers took depositions. Unemployed men loitered near the font, advertising their skills to potential employers. The term Paul's manor meant an idler, a gossip, someone with nothing better to do than haunt the aisles. Pickpockets worked the crowds. In 1561, a royal proclamation banned the carrying of baskets and loads through the nave, forbade the leading of mules and horses, and ordered that no one was to discharge firearms inside the cathedral. The fact that such a proclamation was necessary tells you everything. Around the cathedral walls, booksellers set up stalls, printing and selling everything from Bibles to scandal sheets. Paul's churchyard became the centre of London's book trade, a role it would hold for 3 centuries. Prostitutes frequented the north transept, which became known as the Duke Humphrey's Walk, where penniless men pretended to study the tomb of Humphrey, Duke of Gloucester, while negotiating prices. In 1534, Henry VIII broke with Rome. The Reformation came to St. Paul's like a wrecking crew. In 1538, commissioners arrived to inventory the cathedral's treasures. The shrine of St. Erkenwald was dismantled, its silver melted down and sent to the Royal Mint. The jewels went to the crown. Erkenwald's bones were thrown into a pit. Chantry chapels were dissolved. Altars were stripped. Stained glass was smashed. The rood screen, a carved wooden wall separating nave from choir, thick with images of saints, was torn out and burned. Edward VI's reign brought Protestant zeal. In 1549, Bishop Nicholas Ridley ordered every remaining statue removed. Workmen hauled them into the churchyard and smashed them with hammers. The Jesus altar, the Mary altar, the altar of the Holy Cross, all demolished. The interior walls were whitewashed over the medieval paintings. The cathedral became a bare stone shell, its acoustics harsh and echoing without the tapestries and wood that had softened sound. In 1553, Mary I restored Catholicism. The altars came back. So did the Latin Mass. Ridley himself was burned at the stake in Oxford. But Mary's reign lasted only 5 years. Elizabeth I returned the church to Protestantism in 1559, and this time the changes stuck. The cathedral began to decay. With no chantries funding repairs, with monastic income seized by the crown, maintenance stopped. In 1561, lightning struck the spire again. Fire raced up the wooden frame. The lead sheathing melted. The spire collapsed through the roof, smashing tombs and cracking floor stones. The crash was heard across the city. Elizabeth refused to pay for a replacement. The cathedral sat spireless, the crossing tower capped with a temporary wooden roof that leaked. Rain poured into the transepts. Pigeons nested in the triforium. By 1570, sections of the roof were caving in. The walls were cracked. Stones were falling from the parapets. Bishop John Aylmer begged the Queen for funds. She ignored him. In 1580, the Privy Council authorized a national fundraising campaign. It raised almost nothing. The cathedral was dying, and no one cared. James I took the throne in 1603 and promised money. He gave none. In 1620, a committee was formed to discuss repairs. It took 10 years to agree on a plan. In 1631, Charles I appointed William Laud as Bishop of London and gave him permission to launch another fundraising drive. Laud raised £40,000, much of it through coercion, fines on Catholics, forced donations from wealthy merchants. In 1633, the king hired Inigo Jones, the greatest architect in England, to restore the cathedral. Jones added a classical portico to the western facade, a jarring clash of Renaissance columns against Gothic arches. He reclad the exterior in new stone. He repaired the roof. The work cost over £100,000 and took 12 years. It was never finished. In 1642, the English Civil War began. Parliament controlled London, and Parliament hated bishops. In 1643, Puritan soldiers broke into St. Paul's and smashed what little decoration remained. They tore down the organ. They burned the wooden choir stalls. They used medieval tombs for target practice, firing muskets at the effigies until faces were shot away. The cathedral became a cavalry barracks. Horses were stabled in the nave. Troopers cooked over fires built on the stone floor, and smoke blackened the vaulted ceiling. The churchyard became a marketplace. Vendors sold vegetables and second-hand clothes among the gravestones. In 1649, Parliament executed Charles I. The cathedral bells were silent. Under the Commonwealth, St. Paul's ceased to function as a church. Oliver Cromwell considered demolishing it entirely and selling the stone. Architects surveyed the building and estimated it would take £300,000 to restore. The money didn't exist. In 1658, Cromwell died. In 1660, Charles II returned from exile and was crowned king. The monarchy was restored. The bishops came back. So did the Church of England. Charles II ordered a survey of St. Paul's. The surveyor was Christopher Wren, a 30-year-old mathematician and astronomer with no formal training in architecture. Wren delivered a devastating report: the building was unsound. The columns were cracked. The walls were leaning. The foundations were sinking into the clay soil of Ludgate Hill. He proposed a radical redesign, removing the crossing tower entirely, adding a dome in its place. The cathedral chapter rejected the plan. Too modern. Too expensive. Too foreign. They wanted the old cathedral repaired, not replaced. Wren reluctantly agreed to a patchwork restoration. In 1663, work began. Masons shored up the walls with timber braces. Stone was ordered from Portland. Scaffolding went up along the south transept. Then, in 1665, plague came to London. 40,000 people died that summer. The cathedral closed. The churchyard filled with bodies, buried in mass graves. Wren fled to Paris. When he returned in 1666, he brought sketches of French Baroque churches, buildings flooded with light, crowned with domes, utterly unlike the dark Gothic cathedral crumbling on Ludgate Hill. On Sunday, September 2, 1666, a fire started in a bakery on Pudding Lane, 300 yards east of London Bridge. The summer had been hot. The city was timber and thatch, and the timber was dry. By Monday morning, 300 houses were burning. By Tuesday, the fire had crossed the Fleet River and was climbing Ludgate Hill. St. Paul's stood directly in its path. The cathedral was full of goods. Booksellers from Paul's churchyard had moved their stock inside, believing the stone walls would protect them. Merchants had piled bales of cloth and crates of household goods in the aisles. The building was a warehouse. On Tuesday afternoon, the fire reached the cathedral precinct. Wooden scaffolding along the south side ignited. Flames climbed the scaffold poles and reached the roof. The lead began to melt. Eyewitnesses described molten lead pouring off the roof like a waterfall, running down Ludgate Hill in glowing streams that set cobblestones on fire. The temperature inside the cathedral exceeded 1,000 degrees. Stone exploded. Columns cracked and fell. The roof collapsed into the nave, crushing everything beneath. The vaulted ceiling shattered. Tombs burst open, and the bones of medieval bishops turned to ash. Paper burned in vast clouds, thousands upon thousands of books, centuries of printed knowledge, going up in smoke that turned the London sky black. By Wednesday morning, the fire had moved west, leaving the cathedral a smoking shell. The wall still stood, but the interior was gone. The stone was fire-scarred and calcined, turned brittle by heat. When workmen tried to salvage stone from the ruins, it crumbled under their hammers. Over the next 2 years, labourers cleared the site, carting away 300,000 tons of rubble. They found melted bells, lead ingots fused with charred timber, coins melted into lumps, human bones, impossible to identify. Christopher Wren was appointed to design the replacement. This time, there was no debate. Walk through the modern cathedral today, and you will find almost nothing of the medieval building. A few stones in the crypt, reused from the old foundations. A single carved capital, scorched by fire, displayed in the Triforium gallery. Everything else is Wren's. The dome that replaced the spire. The Baroque interior where the Gothic nave stood. The Portland stone where Kentish rag stone once rose. But in the south churchyard, beneath the grass, archaeologists have mapped the foundations of the old cathedral, still buried in the clay. The footprint is enormous, 50 feet longer than Wren's building. And on winter mornings, when frost settles on Ludgate Hill, you can still see the outline where the transepts once stood, etched in white against the green. Old St. Paul's burned for 3 days and took 600 years to build. It was never one building. It was a dozen, each rising from the ashes of the last. A cathedral that refused to die. Until, finally, it did.